Did you not like think back to the old meme as you were watching that fight of like M1 grappling? That's that's all I could think about was just like somebody. It was like 2011 MMA fan voice MMA grappling or M1 grappling. That's all I could think of.
Oh man,
that whole fucking fight, man. Jesus.
What did you hear her post-fight interview?
I did not, because you could not pay me enough money to want to hear words come out of Jessica Ai's mouth.
It was so much worse than the fight. She was just like screaming, and she was so excited. She was so hyped up, and she was just screaming, "Nobody wants to see you throw strikes. People want to see wrestling." It's like, yeah, that's what I always think when I'm watching like Anthony Joshua box. I'm like, man, nobody cares. Shoot for a double leg already.
I would much rather see this guy with a single collar tie throwing half-hearted punches to the ribs.
Yeah.
That's what I think when I see Anthony Joshua throw that laser right hand.
Yeah. I mean, can he hit an outside trip against somebody who's standing way too tall and could barely defend it? I mean, those are questions I don't have the answers to.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the story of Jessica Ai's career, which is that somehow the next thing that comes out of her mouth will be worse than the last thing that came out of her mouth. So, like, do you remember
Jessica Ai, the hole digger?
Do you remember when she called herself a Victorian of circumstance?
Yeah, yeah, that was my favorite quote of hers.
Oh God, there are so many. How can you choose?
A Victorian. Well, she was certainly a Victorian for the first time in like 4 fights this weekend, so good for her on that. Hello and welcome to Heavy Hips, which is what the show is being called now in honor of Jessica Ai, who rightly pointed out last weekend that people don't care about the shit that we specialize in. Co-host Patrick Wyman, they care about wrestling, and that's all we're going to talk about on this edition of Heavy Hips. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch. With me is Dr. Patrick Wyman, as always, and we have a lot of interesting action from last weekend's UFC St. Louis card to discuss. The main event, of course, being between Jeremy Stephens and Doo-Ha Choi. A lot of violence happened in that fight, but before we can even get to it, we have to jump in on the main event of UFC 220, because next weekend, one of the most compelling heavyweight title fights in recent, not even so recent memory, is taking place. Stipe Miocic, who has tied the heavyweight record, has tied the record.
Heavyweight title defense record.
There we go. Those are the words in the correct order. Has tied the record for heavyweight title defenses at 2, which isn't all that impressive, but at heavyweight, nobody seems to keep the belt very long. He will be defending his title against Francis Ngannou, who just can't seem to stop knocking people out. Much to Jessica's chagrin, Ngannou just keeps destroying people with strikes. I mean, we can talk about the thought process behind that and how foolish it is, but what do you make of the fight, Pat?
I think this is the most intriguing heavyweight title fight in a long time.
Hell yeah.
Because Ngannou is not a known quantity.
Yeah.
There is a lot that we don't know about him, and what we do know is pretty goddamn impressive. It's been a long time since there's been a heavyweight prospect who has this kind of feeling of destiny about him. Like, you have to go back literally to Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos to find a heavyweight prospect where you're like, holy shit, this dude, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that's not a knock on Stipe, but Stipe's road to the top was kind of up and down, and there were things that happened. Like, he had some losses. He got knocked out in that weird fashion by Stefan Struve, and then he lost that fight to Junior Dos Santos, and he had some fights that weren't exceptionally impressive in there. So, like, Miocic's road to the top was not quite as smooth a road. Like, you remember that fight he had with Gabriel Gonzaga?
Oh, I remember.
Like, that's Francis Ngannou has not had a Miocic-Gonzaga type fight.
No.
He hasn't had any losses. Most of his fights have been he's finished everybody, right? Like, yes, he has finished all of his opponents.
Yep, he's been on that phenom track.
Yeah, this is as close to he has as close to a feeling of destiny as you will ever see with a heavyweight prospect.
Are you implying, Pat, that making a title fight compelling is not about like testing the prospect against every conceivable opponent and making sure they can wrestle? Are you implying that maybe it's about, even when a fighter has a lot of unknowns, it's about story and narrative, that is what makes the fight interesting?
That may be a potential implication of what I'm saying here. Yes, that may be a potential implication.
Because you're right. Like, I do want to emphasize, there is still, and we said this is a lot of what we said before Ngannou's last fight with Alistair Overeem, there is still so much we don't know about the totality of Francis Ngannou's MMA game. There's so much we don't know. But that's kind of part of what makes it so exciting, right?
He hasn't even been to the third round in the UFC.
Right.
We have no idea what his cardio is going to look like if he's pushed. We've seen him wrestle, but we haven't seen him in there with like an elite MMA wrestler. We don't know what kind of depth and layers he has to his striking game, because again, we haven't seen him in there with a high level guy deep into a fight. Like, there's just a lot of questions about it. But you know what? Who gives a shit? Like, let's see him in there. Let's get him in there with Stipe. Let's just see what happens. Let's like smash them together like action figures and see what kind of sparks fly.
Ngannou has undoubtedly earned a title shot with his wins. We don't need to have questions answered. Like, this is going into this fight with questions is a big part of why I'm so excited. I mean, this is what sets it apart, because we have this crazy phenom that we don't know almost anything about, except that he is exceptionally dangerous. And the question is, how is Stipe Miocic going to respond to that? How is he going to do differently against Ngannou? How is he going to fight Ngannou differently from all of Ngannou's previous opponents? How is he going to try to solve the riddle? And will the riddle knock his fucking head off in the first round? That's compelling.
Think back to the last few guys that Miocic has fought. You know, like he fought Junior Dos Santos, whom he had already fought for 25 minutes, in addition to there being like 9 years of UFC tape on that guy. Yeah. He fought Alistair Overeem, who's been around since 1999, and even in his most current incarnation, there's a ton of film on him. He fought Fabricio Verdum, who has been around forever. He fought Andrei Arlovski, who's been around forever. He fought Mark Hunt, who's been around forever. And before that, he fought Junior Dos Santos. Like, the Miocic has been fighting dudes where you more or less know who and what they are, you know?
Very few unknown quantities in the UFC heavyweight division, because most of them have been around forever.
Forever. Literally forever. These guys are fucking antediluvian.
Since the dawn
before the flood.
Antediluvian. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, but that creates an interesting kind of challenge for Stipe as he's preparing for this fight. How do you deal with a guy about whom you know very little?
Yeah. That's what makes it compelling. So let's talk about what we don't know about Francis Ngannou and how Stipe Miocic might try to solve some of those unknowns, or at least try to answer some of those questions. My big one, and I want to recall something that Brian Stan said about Francis Ngannou just before he fought Andrei Arlovski last year. Might have been actually the year before last. He said he's very patient. He talked to his coaches before the fight. They said that's not something they taught him. He's just naturally a patient guy. He doesn't rush for the finish. And despite having a lot of first-round finishes, that's absolutely true. I think Ngannou is a counter-puncher by nature. That is what he likes to do. And so my big question is, can he lead? Can he lead consistently if Miocic does what he has done to opponents in the past and decides to take his foot off the gas pedal, stop pressuring, and let Ngannou chase him? Because the thing is that Ngannou is an insanely accurate counterpuncher. He has very good timing, and he is really composed and patient. So he will just wait for you to let go. But everyone he's fought so far has just tried to rip big shots at him. That has been their response to the subtle pressure and unbreakable patience of Francis Ngannou, is to load up and try to bomb him, which is absolutely what he wants. That is exactly the way to allow him to time you and counter you. What happens if somebody like Stipe Miocic just fits little jabs, little feints, little touches into those gaps? And does Ngannou only have the big counter bombs to respond with? Can he jab with Stipe Miocic if he is not given the chance to easily time the champion's chin.
Yeah, I think that is probably the right tack to take here. If you rush at Francis Ngannou, I think if Miocic tries to fight him the way that he fought Junior Dos Santos, the way that he tried to fight, or the way that he has fought Alistair Overeem after the very opening seconds of that fight, if he tries to pressure, I think he's going to put himself in position to get his block knocked off.
Yeah, because he doesn't have great defense, Stipe Miocic.
He does not. Like, this is Stipe. I don't think still gets the credit he deserves for being a really, really good fighter. Like, he's genuinely elite. He's one of the very best heavyweights we've seen over the last few years. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't have but he's an offensive fighter. I think it's safe to say he's a guy who at his best is thinking about how he's going to hurt you and finding various ways to do that.
Yeah.
He's not a guy who builds a lot of layered defense into his game.
There were seriously moments like the first knockdown in his fight with Overeem. It looked like somebody who was looking at somebody as a target, completely ignoring for the, oh my gosh. People have been complaining about the sounds of me hitting the microphone stand, so I thought I would do it even more. He looked like he was just looking for an opening. Like he wasn't even considering in that moment, thought that Overeem might just unload and hit him in the chin with a straight left hand. And despite that being a weapon that came from very far away, despite Overeem really leaning into it and kind of telegraphing it, for that first knockdown in their UFC 203 fight, Miocic did not react at all. He just wasn't ready for it. And Ngannou has a lot of that kind of shit to feed him if he comes forward only thinking about offense. And honestly, I don't know that Miocic can fight an aggressive style without sort of forgetting about his defensive responsibility.
Yeah, well, I think that's because on some level, we've spent a fair bit of time talking about how do we classify Stipe Miocic.
Yeah.
And I think he's a boxer puncher in that he can do a lot of different things and feels comfortable doing a lot of different things. When he pressures, though, I think he has to think about pressuring. I think that's what sets him apart from like a more natural pressure fighter is he really has to focus on it and concentrate on the forward movement and letting his shots go piece of it. Like, how do I cut this guy off? What do I throw? It doesn't feel as natural as somebody like Daniel Cormier. When Cormier gets after you and he pressures, like Cormier is just thinking about Cormier is not really thinking about the forward movement piece of it. He's thinking about a lot of different things that allow him to be a little more complete with his pressure game. Stipe, I think, really has to kind of steel himself to get in there and do it. And that means kind of steeling himself to say, okay, I'm going to get hit. I'm going to get hit. I'm going to get hit. And that's okay.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like Overeem was catching him in these little moments of hesitation where he would pause in front of his opponent. He's like, I've got him cut off. Okay, now how do I get in there? What's going to happen? And then he just gets clocked in that moment of deliberation. And yeah, those seem like moments that somebody like Francis Ngannou really could take advantage of. If Miocic is just spending the entire fight trying to walk him down. So I agree. Like, I think if I'm Miocic, I'm taking the tack that I took against, sort of the tack I took against Shane Del Rosario, against Roy Nelson, against Gabriel Gonzaga. I am mostly trying to stay on the back foot, and I am trying to test Ngannou's well-understood patience. I am trying to see how patient can you be if I just don't let you do anything. Because this is something Phil McKenzie and I talked about on the most recent episode of The Underdogs. We did that on the Heavy Hands Patreon. I know I'm turning this into a plug now, and Lucy is excited about that. She loves salesmanship. But you should check out the most recent episode. We basically gave our love to John McDessie, who's one of our favorite like unheralded UFC fighters, and we sort of talked about him as somebody who heralded a new era of MMA striking, somebody who, with a few very like simple, efficient tools, was able to just sort of drive wedges into the gaps of these fighters' games that had nothing but big moves to throw at him, and so he didn't have to change up a lot of things. He didn't have to have great timing. He just had the right moves to just pop something in there when they were loading up for the big shot. That is what Stipe Miocic needs, I think, against Francis Ngannou, is just to interrupt, give Ngannou nothing to counter, and then just break his rhythm when he thinks about unloading a bomb.
Okay, so I'm with you. I think that that's exactly correct. But the problem is Ngannou is looking back at his oeuvre, his body of work here, in preparation to talk about this, I realized how good a counterpuncher he is.
Yeah.
You do not need to give him much to key on for him to turn it into an opportunity to land something big. If you toss kind of a half-hearted jab out there or a feinted jab, he will blast you over the top with a shot like that.
Yeah.
The knockdown he hit on Curtis Blades, this was really surprising to me looking back at this in hindsight. I'd completely forgotten this. Blades throws a pretty good low kick, right? He's at very long range. He kind of pulls his head off line as he throws it. Ngannou feints a jab counter to that. He's in southpaw. He feints a jab counter, waits a half beat, and then throws a straight left hand that catches Blades right on the side of the head. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful sequence because it's not predictable. It's not the first shot. And I think you're right. Miocic is going to be ready to deal with that first layer of counters that Ngannou throws at him. He's going to be keyed in on the same time kind of stuff that Ngannou likes to throw at the one strike at a time kind of thing. I think he's going to be ready for that. The problem is, what if it turns out that like those kinds of flashes are actually the heart and soul of Ngannou's game? That he can pull you off guard by knowing that he's going to throw back at you. He can play with that tendency. He can play with that awareness that he's going to throw back and use that to set up something even more dangerous. Like the shot that he knocked out Overeem with was not the first counter. It was a response to Overeem's counter. Mm-hmm. He drew Overeem into an exchange and then landed that uppercut. Yep. He tossed something out there to draw out Overeem's counter. Overeem landed the shot. It was a beautiful kind of looping left hook, and it was the counter to the counter that knocked him out. Like, I don't think I think we need to be aware of how of the fact that there may be layers to Ngannou's game. We don't know how deep those layers go, but that could be seriously problematic.
Yeah, I think he pauled at Overeem. Overeem dipped in, and I might dispute the beautiful claim. Got a little wild for my taste, swinging at Ngannou and not looking at him because he was so fucking nervous because we know how Overeem gets. We did just talk about his fight with Miocic. But Ngannou, drew the reaction, pulled his head back away from the first counter, went for a counter, saw that Overeem was throwing again, pivoted, and hit him with that left hook / uppercut and took his head off. And yeah, that's the thing is you only get to see these little flashes, but what flashes you see from Ngannou are kind of brilliant. It looks like somebody who they just understand striking exchanges. And
I've got an analogy for you here, and I think this is kind of the central question of this fight is imagine you're on a boat going through the Arctic. Yeah. Right? And you're surrounded, there's ice everywhere. But you don't know whether the pieces of ice that you're seeing are little ice floes. Is this just some a chunk of ice floating along the surface, or is this a frickin' iceberg? Yeah. How deep underwater does this go? And I think that's kind of the question about Ngannou's game. Are the pieces that we're seeing, are they just little things that are floating along the surface? Or is there something really deep underlying every one of those pieces that we see that's going to be transferable in a 5-round heavyweight title fight with an absolutely elite opponent who deserves to be the champion and who has put his stamp on this division for the last couple of years now? Yeah. That's the question. How deep does it go?
Because we've seen a lot of first layers from Ngannou, and we've seen hints of second layers, but it's can Miocic control him with wrestling? I don't know. I just don't know, because I know Ngannou can shut down a takedown. I know Ngannou can slip a punch, and I know Ngannou can respond to these things, and he looks super comfortable doing it. But it's that nobody gets past the first layer, so. Asking if Miocic you can't ask that question. Can Miocic get past that first layer without wondering, well, what the hell's the second layer like? Is there a second layer at all? And might it be even more dangerous?
So let's take a step back here. Let's think about this fight in terms of our basics, right? How do we approach a fight? We want to think about distance and position in the cage. What distance is Miocic going to want to fight this at? What distance is Ngannou going to want to fight this at?
Kind of similar distances. I mean, if I'm Miocic, I want to keep a longer range from Ngannou. I want to stay out of the pocket and just step in and out.
But how's that going to work for Miocic's takedown game? He's not really a blast double kind of guy. He likes snatch singles. So if he's going to want to try to impose some wrestling here. I don't think he wants to be in the clinch with Ngannou, but I do think he's going to want to try to shoot a takedown or two. If that's the case, how does he get inside to work those? What does he double jab, try to draw out the counter, then duck down for then kind of duck under for the single?
I think we'd have to see more granularity, to use that fancy term again, from Miocic than we've seen in most of his fights. We'd have to see him feinting to draw things out. We'd have to see him interrupting what he draws out, and then we'd have to see him adding another layer and turning that into a takedown or some pressure towards the fence. And I don't think
we saw him do that to Mark Hunt.
That's true.
That was something he did a lot to Mark Hunt. Was he would strike, move forward, strike, get Hunt responding to that. Then when Hunt was committing, then Miocic would duck under, grab that snatch single, and run the pipe and get him down. So can he do that to Ngannou, who is way bigger, has a way longer reach? It's going to be much harder for him to do that. I think like the whatever Ngannou's takedown defense looks like, I think Miocic is going to have a hard time keeping it at a range.
Yeah,
that's. I mean, I don't. Okay, so that's one piece of it. I think you're right, though, all the way out or all the way in. You don't want to be in the pocket.
Jesus Christ.
So
sorry, there's a lot of mic noise going on over here because a fucking kitten has just invaded my lap and has no idea. Doesn't understand boundaries. Oh, my God. Okay, we're going on. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, so all the way out or all the way in. I think you're right. So this is going to be an outfighting kind of game from Miocic. Do you think he can do that here? You talked a lot about the kind of layers that he would need to make that kind of wrestling game work. I don't think Ngannou is going to overcommit and give him reactive takedowns. Do you?
No. I think like what I've seen from Ngannou so far is he's picking a shot when somebody is like backing up or out of position. I mean, he waits for you to be out of position. That is when he throws. And he I don't know, he seems to have a really well-honed instinct, at least from the very small sample size we have, of waiting for his opponents to be out of position. So I don't think he's going to be throwing himself off balance. I don't think he's going to be chasing after Miocic unless Miocic is badly hurt and he's trying to finish him. And again,
that is something we've seen from Ngannou is if he smells blood, he could get himself out of position, maybe get himself taken down. Like following up that knockdown on Blades, he gave up he gave up his hips basically because he thought Blades was more hurt than he actually was and almost got taken down.
And maybe that's it. Maybe Ngannou does, what Overeem did to Miocic and maybe like just can't hold up that momentum after having some success early. I don't know, but like really, everything I think of at this fight just keeps coming back to yes. Do I think Miocic has the tools? Yes. Do I think they fit together into a game plan that he can execute consistently for as long as it takes to beat Ngannou without giving him something to time and getting hit? I don't know. I'm kind of feeling no.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of questions about Francis Ngannou, but I think what we do know about him bodes really poorly for Miocic.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of my read on this. I came into this fight expecting to pick Miocic. I really thought after watching through all of Miocic's film, I really thought I was going to pick him here. Then I watched Ngannou, and I think it's hard to overstate how special he is. Could he lose this fight? Absolutely. Good chance he's going to. I think he's probably 45% to lose this fight. But the counter punching against the heart of the fight here is a good, clean, dangerous counter puncher against a guy who's not that hard to hit.
Yeah, and I don't know that Miocic will even try to fight to the game plan that we've laid out. He might try to pressure Miocic or Ngannou. And maybe it'll work. Maybe Ngannou can't handle sustained pressure. But it's going to be some very, very dangerous minutes to open the first round if that's the way he approaches it.
If this gets into the third, fourth, fifth round, this is Miocic's fight. There's very little question about that to me. But if this is the first couple of rounds, Miocic is always hittable early, too. I mean, Verdum was lighting him up pretty well before the finish.
Yeah.
Like, Verdum was landing a lot of good shots on him. Overeem landed good shots on him. Early in the fight, Miocic is exceptionally hittable and also, I think this is kind of important to note, does not take an awesome shot. Like, he's a tough guy. He's a durable guy. but he's not like a granite chin kind of dude.
He got a big ass head. He's got one of those just very hittable faces. And yeah, he even in like the damn, it's like hard for me to even think of a Stipe Miocic fight in which he really showed tremendous durability. I guess the Junior Dos Santos fight, but
he got hit a lot by Junior. Junior hit him a lot.
Yeah, but it was also like, not Junior at his best, I don't think. Junior looking very flat and having a ton of trouble early and really struggling with that pressure. I just don't think Ngannou's going to struggle with the pressure in the same way, if that's the approach Miocic brings. I just kind of feels like an early Ngannou knockout to me. I don't know. It's hard. It feels inescapable at this point because that's all we've seen from Ngannou, and perhaps that's just me being conned by what we've seen. But really, it's difficult to imagine the strategy that Miocic could bring to this fight that would allow him to protect his chin in those first few minutes alone.
Yeah, I mean, a better version of what Curtis Blaydes tried to do, I think. The Blade, it's easy to forget now because Blaydes had his eye completely closed, and it was a doctor stoppage in a fight that frankly went on way longer than it needed to.
Yeah.
But Blaydes was doing the right things. I think Blaydes, out of everybody who has fought Ngannou, has shown the best inklings of what a game plan to beat him would look like, which would be jab him, fill up those spaces with offense, be careful with your defense, know that you're going to get hit, kind of steel yourself to take the shot, and work in takedowns whenever you possibly can. Try to tie him up whenever you possibly can. And just know that you're going to have to eat some bombs. So Miocic can do that. Miocic has the tools to do that. The problem is Ngannou is way better now than he was when he fought Curtis Blaydes. That was almost 2 years ago, and the version of Ngannou that's going to fight Stipe Miocic is miles better than that. So that's still the game plan. Miocic is better than Curtis Blaydes was in 2016, but whether he can carry out the same kind of game plan without getting his block knocked off, I think is kind of the problem. And I don't think he can. I think Ngannou's going to knock him out.
Because Ngannou's his distance management looks better. The little angles that he hits when he's throwing his combinations, he just looks like a smoother, more comfortable version of the guy he was when he fought Blaydes. And honestly, there's enough parity in this division. How much better than Curtis Blaydes is Stipe Miocic compared to how much better is Francis Ngannou than the typical heavyweight prospect? Ngannou is just something really, really special.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I mean, this is one thing. I don't think you or I realized this prior to Ngannou's last fight. He's been working with Jerome LeBanner.
Oh, yeah. We didn't realize that, but somebody shouted it out in comments, and I don't know how good JLB is as a coach, but I like that.
He's a hell of a fighter.
Yeah.
I think it's a good. I think it's a good analog for Ngannou, a guy who wants to focus on his hands first and foremost. Kicks not as big a deal for him. Pretty good counterpuncher, technically sound, and extremely heavy-handed.
Yeah.
I think that's not a bad kind of model for Ngannou to base himself on.
Hopefully Ngannou does not inherit LeBanner's penchant for winning fights and then just suddenly losing them over and over again.
Well, we haven't seen that from him so far. But yeah, so shouts to JLB, one of my very favorite kickboxers of all time. Nice to see him out here in the soup. Yeah,
in the soup. All right, well, on that curious note, we're going to end segment 1. When we come back, we're going to get into the rest of UFC 220, and it is not, Pat, an especially deep card. Honestly, even the co-main event, a title fight between Daniel Cormier and Volkan Oezdemir, definitely hard to get as excited for that one, from my perspective, as it is the main event. But we're going to be talking about Cormier Oezdemir in the next segment, as well as Calvin Kattar versus Shane Burgos. I'm extremely excited for that matchup. I think it's going to be fire. And also, another one that has similar tenor to it, Thomas Almeida versus Rob Font. And then after that, we are going to get into our recap of UFC St. Louis and the victory of Jeremy Stephens over Doo Ho Choi in the main event. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And we are back with Heavy Hands, and as promised, Daniel Cormier, the light heavyweight champion, once again, after actually being decisively beaten via knockout by John Jones, who then popped for some manner of steroid. Have you heard about this, Pat? Now they're saying that they don't believe that John Jones took anything deliberately. I mean, as someone who really doesn't give a shit about steroids and really thinks that like the invasion of privacy fighters are made to go through under people like USADA is worse than any consequences of steroids. I mean, really, people who suffer the most consequences of steroid use are the fighters who use them, because it fucks you up. But, like, what the hell?
Yeah, I mean, this is so. What you're referring to are recent comments by Jeff Nowitzki, formerly a guy who formerly worked for the government investigating steroids in sports, especially Barry Bonds, who has worked for the UFC for the last couple of years and has helped to coordinate their efforts with USADA. Well, Nowitzki, this is now the second time where Nowitzki has made comments on the record, about John Jones, about a positive John Jones test that would seem to indicate that they're trying to minimize how long Jones will be suspended for. So if you wanted to be a little suspicious about that, I think that would probably be fair. And just kind of on another note, Nowitzki is trash. Like, if you care at all about civil liberties, you should hate Nowitzki. Sure. Because he was a guy who routinely violated players like rights against Fourth Amendment rights while he was investigating them, namely Bonds. Deadspin wrote up a number of things on what kind of trash Nowitzki is. So if you care more about sports than civil liberties and individual rights against unlawful search and seizure, you should probably not be a big fan of Nowitzki. But yeah, now he's out here just shilling for the UFC and John Jones.
Well, this is why you don't argue for stronger restrictions on fighters and constantly trying to lock them down and make sure, because they're just the people are just going to make exceptions for the ones they want to anyway. All you ever end up hurting are the poor schmucks who make like $30,000 a fight and are struggling to get by. Because they can't afford the good steroids.
It's the fighters who get suspended for 2 years before they've ever debuted. I'm not yeah, sure, you're responsible for whatever you put in your body. Yeah, absolutely. But guess what? There's some favorites playing games here.
Always.
Speaking of which, I wonder what happened to all the drug test results from that UFC card in Boston that Conor McGregor fought on a few years ago, where no results were ever announced by the Massachusetts Commission. Just throwing that out there if you want to get a little conspiratorial.
Almost certainly nothing, Pat. I mean, this kind of thing never happens for a reason. We don't have decades of evidence from the New York State Athletic Commission to indicate that commissioners might be willing to sweep things under the rug if money is on the line. But anyway, Daniel Cormier is the champion again. After all of this insane bullshit, now John Jones is going to be exonerated once again, or at least the evidence is starting to point to that being the ultimate result of all this. But Daniel Cormier has the belt back around his waist. I'm fine with it. The rules are what they are. Daniel Cormier is clearly the second best light heavyweight in the world, and he did have... We actually, I think, made a gross error in forgetting to mention Cormier Jones 2 in our Fights of the Year selection, because...
Yeah, it got really fucking good.
Yeah, it got overshadowed by all the shit that happened afterwards, but it was a phenomenal fight, and both guys had a lot to do with that. Cormier looking supremely confident in his pressure. It looked like it was probably going the same way as last time, but Jones finished it violently, and both guys looked sharp, and it was just a fucking war, and I loved it. And now Daniel Cormier is back, and now he's fighting Volkan Oezdemir. And it's hard to feel as excited as I did either for the last fight we talked about or for Cormier Jones 2, because
we probably also erred in not including Volkan Oezdemir in our newcomer of the year category.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. He probably is the breakout fighter of the year. And yet I feel like I don't have enough questions about him like I do with Ngannou, and so it makes him less interesting. It's like it's so easy to just explain away Oezdemir's knockouts. It's just like, well, that happens.
Well, because it's light heavyweight, right? Like, because Jimmy Manuwa, while a really good fighter, is also 37 years old. We've seen him get knocked out a couple of times before. Jimmy Manuwa getting knocked out by kind of a weird shot is not surprising. Watching Misha Cirkunov get knocked out by a shot behind the ear just feels like, oh yeah, that's a thing that happens.
Yeah, I mean, well, granted, like, this is the thing. This is actually an interesting study in contrast, because you can also say a lot of the same things about the people Ngannou's been knocking out. It's not like Overeem and Andrei Arlovsky are known for their durability. And yet, with Oezdemir, it just kind of feels flat in comparison. It doesn't, he's just not as, like, flashy and impressive, but maybe that's kind of part of...
Think about the names you just mentioned. Alistair Overeem and Andrei Arlovsky are names that mean things.
Yeah, well, that's it, yeah.
And the part of the problem here is, like, guys like Jimmy Manuwa and Misha Cirkunov, when you beat them, it's not the same feeling of, oh yeah, Jimmy Manuwa and Misha Cirkunov.
You're right. It's not like those names mean anything. It's just kind of like, oh, he's gotten 2 wins that I didn't expect him to get, rather than, holy shit, I think he killed Alistair Overeem tonight.
Plus a split decision over Oezdemir St. Preux.
It's been a great run at light heavyweight for Volkan Oezdemir. It really has.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, give the guy all the credit he deserves, which is that he beat St. Preux on short notice. He had, like, I think 2 weeks notice for that fight to cut all the weight down to 205, and he had been fighting at heavyweight before that. The guy, he's really good. He's a good fighter. But it's hard not to think, like, Volkan Oezdemir, huh?
It's all just so weird. It's like there's
come
always
to this.
Yeah. It's come to this. Volkan Oezdemir, title challenger. Now, here's the thing. All that being said, I think it would be very, very dangerous for Daniel Cormier to overlook a fighter like Volkan Oezdemir. There is a lot that Oezdemir has going for him, that the sort of weirdness and who gives a shitness of his light heavyweight run. I keep saying light heavyweight. He's always been a light heavyweight, but his UFC run, that there's... You know, it kind of overshadows it, the weirdness and the meaninglessness of those wins. He's got big power in his hands. That much is clear. He is quite good in the clinch. He seems really, really strong there. Shockingly difficult to take down, although I doubt Daniel Cormier will have the same amount of trouble that previous opponents have. But quite dangerous in close range and really good at leveraging shots while he's controlling his opponent's posture or while breaking away and creating space. Really good at just sort of sneaking these weird but very heavy punches in when you don't expect them and don't see them coming. When you think you're chasing after him, you walk into a shot. When you think he's just sort of manhandling you, you get hit on the chin. And these shots seem to hurt people. They really seem to hurt more than they look like they should.
Well, he is a proper kickboxer. Not like some dude who's done some training with Henry Hooft.
Or Dan Burke.
He is a proper professional kickboxer. He has professional kickboxing fights under his belt. He fought in Super Combat back in 2014. That's a big kickboxing organization. He has spent years training in the Netherlands, and now he's a Henry Hooft guy. Like, he's not just some dude who rolled into a gym and started throwing 1, 2, 3 low kick.
Yeah.
Like, he's a legit experienced kickboxer with a lot of talent. And as you pointed out, very, very heavy hands. But you see it in the kind of the balance and the way that he throws combinations, right? Like, he's never overextending himself. He brings his feet with him when he punches, which is where his power comes from. He's not leaning into his shots. He always has his feet under him. He's torquing into the shots that he throws without really overextending himself. Like most Dutch stylists, he's not like a super clean defensive fighter. But he's very comfortable exchanging. He does not mind throwing back at you. And usually when he throws back, it's 2 or 3 shots. It's not just one.
Yeah.
So he goes kicks to punches and punches to kicks really effectively. Like you mentioned, the clinch, which again is a sign of how good a kickboxer he is. Like, it's a proper high level kickboxer's clinch, not an I've taken a couple of Muay Thai classes clinch.
Yeah. Yeah, it stands apart from most of the sort of Thai style clinches we see in the light heavyweight division. It really does. And still, like, good quality striking based clinch fighting, still all too rare. As I don't know if you caught the Invicta card that took place on Saturday, Pat, but a Thai fighter by the name of Loma Lukbunmi made her debut on that card, and just the Thai fighters in the clinch are just worlds beyond the kind of shit we see in MMA. And I was reminded once again, like, damn, I need to see more people ripping their opponents bodily into clinch knees, flinging them off balance. It's a very dangerous position. Oezdemir is not quite on that level, but he's got a dangerous clinch, and that makes him an interesting opponent, I think, for Cormier. The problem is Oezdemir is kind of slow, and I don't think he really does a lot to change up the tempo or the rhythm of his striking attacks. Like, Daniel Cormier is not the world's greatest defensive fighter, but he can time things. He's got a natural feel for the rhythm of a fight, as we saw in that rematch with John Jones. And especially when he's coming forward, I don't think that Oezdemir is going to be able to surprise him at range. And I don't think Oezdemir is going to get enough time just tying up with Cormier in the clinch to melt him with a really weird shot. In fact, I think Cormier is going to be raining punches back at him more than anyone else has in the UFC. Like, it's hard to overstate how much of a step up this is for a fighter like Volkan Oezdemir.
Yeah, I think you hit on a couple of really important things there. That, first of all, Cormier is not going to let himself get pressured by Oezdemir the way that some of Oezdemir's prior opponents have.
Yeah.
He's not going to back up, right? He's either going to plant his feet and throw back at Oezdemir, or he's going to move forward himself. And of those two fighters, I think that Cormier is going to be the more likely one to be doing the pressuring here. If that's the case, I think more than the striking, because Oezdemir can work a little bit off his back foot, but he's more of an exchanger than a stick and move guy.
Yeah.
I think Cormier would pretty early find the limits of that, of what Oezdemir can do off his back foot. I think Oezdemir can deal with that a little bit if he's proactive about the clinch, if he's proactive about making sure that he gets his underhooks, delivering a shot or two, and then immediately getting out of there. I think he can make good use of it against Cormier. The problem is that I think he's not super proactive about getting into the clinch. He'll get in there and then he'll dig for his underhook and then he'll spin around and get the head pressure, but he isn't necessarily thinking right away about, okay, here's the range, I need to step in and grab it now.
Yeah, he would need to be more like John Jones, like step in, grab the neck, fire the knee, and then disengage, like that kind of thing. And it's not exactly. It's not really what he does. Like these tactical strikes of engaging in the clinch. He just sort of, yeah. I mean, unless he might approach this fight differently, knowing that it's Daniel Cormier he's clinching with, but we haven't seen any of that yet. So it's very hard to not pick Daniel Cormier to kind of spend a little bit of time figuring Oezdemir out and eventually just wrestle the hell out of him, with a lot of pressure.
It's hard. Like, Daniel Cormier has successfully out-wrestled much better wrestlers than Volkan Oezdemir over the years. It's hard for me to not see that happening here. And as the fight gets later, we know Cormier can get drained a little bit, but I don't think there's no question in my mind that he's going to have the better cardio here. If this goes into the late into the third, fourth, fifth rounds, I trust Cormier's cardio a lot more than I trust Oezdemir's.
Mm-hmm. But imagine if Oezdemir wins, Pat. I mean,
it could happen. Cormier's getting old. Getting older. He doesn't take shots as well as he used to. He's not that hard to hit. It's not out of the question that Oezdemir stings him with a punch or like a knee as Cormier is ducking down, or an uppercut. Like, those are all real possibilities. I just think it's vastly more likely Cormier kind of wrestle fucks him.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this for Volkan Oezdemir. As far as Black Zillion opponents for Daniel Cormier goes, he definitely does not seem to have much quit in him. He does not seem to break and fold the way that Anthony Johnson does, or even the way that Michael Johnson kind of does. And we'll talk about that a little more later. But Daniel Cormier is the pick for both of us, and I'm sure most of you saw that coming. Let's move on to the next fight on this card, and we only have a little bit of time to discuss these other two, but fortunately for us, Pat, there's not a whole lot else on this card to talk about. Most of it's sort of underwhelming. The two that stand out to me as being must-see fights, as mentioned before.
John Vellante versus Francimar Barros.
Obviously. I'm so glad that Francimar Barros is on the main card of a UFC pay-per-view in 2018. I'm so fucking happy about that. It's exactly what I wanted. That's going to get my mouth watering for Miocic and Ngannou, I'll tell you what. But before that, Calvin Kattar is making his second UFC appointment after surprising a lot of people, except for me, in beating Andre Fili in his short-notice UFC debut. He boxed Andre Fili up in that fight, and now he gets to take on Shane Burgos, who has been boxing everybody else up. And I think it's going to be a really, really entertaining matchup. Your thoughts on it?
I think it's probably the favorite to be fight of the night. It's a really well-matched, really interesting fight between two guys who are both extremely good strikers, but very different kinds of strikers. They're both very technically sound. They're both crisp. They both work at pace and throw combinations. They both cater more than Burgos, but they're both pretty good at working the various levels of the body, going leg, body, head. But yeah, I think Burgos is and it's interesting. We're seeing more of this. We've got two guys on this card who are really like counterpunchers, like pure counterpunchers in the form of Ngannou and Burgos. Burgos really likes to let you throw at him and then throw back.
And he's a super aggressive counterpuncher. He's always in your face waiting for you to try to hit him, and then he just fucks you up for it. Yeah.
He puts a lot of pressure on guys, but like his, I think, teammate, Jimmy Rivera, it's very rarely just one shot. It's usually a couple of shots at a time. He will lead also to draw out your counters. He's got a nice jab that he flicks out there. Kattar, not the world's pretty technically sound, but not like a defensive mastermind. So he's going to get hit by Burgos. Kattar does not mind leading, leads pretty well, does not mind exchanges pretty well. But in those exchanges, you kind of got to like Burgos's power, speed, size, and sheer aggression.
Yeah, that's kind of my feeling as well. It is. I did not realize, like, just looking at Kattar's frame against Fili, I was like, oh, Kattar's going to come into this fight with a reach advantage. Burgos' arms are like 2.5 inches longer than Kattar's. He has crazy long arms for his build.
Freakishly long. I don't understand how Burgos makes 145.
Yeah, that's a good point.
He's huge.
Yeah. And he certainly got like the power of a 155er. He seems to crack really hard, even when he's not putting a ton of mustard on his shots.
Yeah, like I would kind of be surprised because I think Burgos is only 26. I would be really surprised if Burgos didn't end his career as a lightweight or even a welterweight.
Sure.
He's a big dude.
Yeah, and maybe not that long before he has to move up. But the way I see this matchup is that I think Kattar has the jab to give Burgos some problems. Burgos does like to sort of lean his head out there. I mean, he knows to move it when you throw. He knows to respond. But because he does invite leads, clever fighters do hit him. Even not very clever fighters, like they still get in with shots just by changing up what they're throwing because Burgos spends so much. He is as consistently vulnerable as a pressure fighter, but he does not like to lead as much as he likes to counter.
Burgos is a classic example of a guy who is not a bad defensive fighter, but he gets hit a lot because the pace at which he's working guarantees that he's going to get hit.
Yeah, his pace and his range, he's always there to be hit. He's not, I mean, typically when you use that phrase, you're implying that somebody has bad defense. He is available as a target, but he knows that, you know what I mean? And takes himself away from the center line, slips, rolls, does a lot of great things defensively. There's just no way not to get hit at all when you're that constantly in striking range.
Exactly. Like if you look at the percentage of shots that he gets hit with and the percentage of shots that hit him cleanly, considering the range at which he operates, he's an exceptional defensive fighter. It's just that like if you're at a range where your opponent can throw 18 or 20 strikes a minute without having to work at it, you are in absolute terms going to eat a high number of shots.
Yeah. So if I'm Calvin Kattar, I'm seeing myself as a Charles Rosa with much less ugly, more precise, and more dangerous striking. Is try to run Shane Burgos around, kick him a lot, and Kattar is definitely the more willing kicker of the two, I think. And has a really good, strong, stiff jab that he can double up on, that he can kind of disguise the timing of it. The problem is that overall, Kattar does kind of tend to just like load up and just pump out power shots. When he throws a combination, it's not that hard to time him for a fighter like Burgos. He just kind of like power, power, power. There's no change in tempo there. There's no touching you up twice with one hand in a row. It's just kind of left, right, big power on each one. And I think getting into those kind of exchanges, those are going to be the moments where Burgos has an opportunity to turn around what might otherwise be a very competitive long-range fight. I think when Kattar tries to exchange, and I don't think he'll be able to resist the urge to exchange, that's when Burgos is gonna start tagging him.
Yeah, Kattar is a Mark Delagrati fighter, and that means that he's got pretty good fundamentals. He's got really good fundamental footwork. He pivots beautifully. He's got really nice tight kind of in space movement. But that also means he's a little bit rote, I think, especially on the counters. Like that when you throw at him, Delagrati, at least in my mind, does not really like his guys moving too much. He likes them moving efficiently. And part of that means trying to stop guys if they're trying to pressure you by throwing back at them. They're clean technical counters, but they're a little predictable. And I think Burgos is such an organic, read you kind of fighter that eventually he's going to catch on to the tendencies. Like he'll figure out when I throw this, Kattar throws back, which means I have an opportunity to throw this.
Yeah.
So I would kind of expect Kattar to be winning the fight up until the point when Burgos lands something that changes things.
Right. Yeah. And Kattar's scrappy. It's not like he's, he will fight back, but I think it's gonna the way Burgos fights, most of his bouts tend to sort of be a slow downhill slide for his opponents after he starts finding those openings early. It just gets worse. So on to the next one, and very quickly for this one, unfortunately, because this one also promises to be very violent and very fun to watch as long as it lasts. Thomas Almeida is taking on Rob Font earlier on the card, and I mean, I think these guys are going to bang. Rob Font, of course, a teammate of Calvin Kattar. So we mentioned that Shane Burgos teammated Jimmy Rivera earlier. Now Rob Font is going to try to set the stage for Kattar to fight Burgos further on down the card. Honestly, I don't think that Font has the defensive responsibility to do what he likes to do long enough against Thomas Almeida. Almeida is probably going to get hurt early. He may very well get knocked down. He's probably going to get tagged clean. Font's got a really nice sharp jab, just like Kattar's. He's got a heavy right hand. He can throw good combinations, but they tend to be a little rote, and he does not have Kattar's instinct for avoiding exchanges. It's easier to bait Rob Font into a trade, and that is a bad idea against Thomas Almeida.
Yeah, I expect Font's jab to give Almeida a lot of problems early on. Almeida, again, like, not a bad defensive fighter. It's just that he puts himself in position where he's going to get a lot of shots thrown at him. And also he does, but even more than a guy like Burgos, Almeida does not take a great punch. No. I think like he's pretty young, but Almeida has eaten a lot of shots over the course of his career. He was a kickboxer before he was an MMA fighter, and he's now had like 20-something MMA fights in which he's taken quite a bit of damage. Like his chin is not great. I don't think it was ever great, and it's not getting better from the amount that he's gotten hit.
Yeah. If you showed me an exchange, when they traded left hooks, Thomas Almeida and Jimmy Rivera, if you showed me a freeze frame of those two left hooks being exchanged and told me that one of these guys got knocked down, I would have actually picked Jimmy Rivera. Jimmy Rivera, I think, ate the cleaner, harder shot right on the target, but it was Almeida eating a sort of cuffing, not quite clean left hand that dropped. It doesn't really seem to take much, especially early when he's cold, to put him down.
Yeah, it's not even like it's also not like he's out of position to take these shots either. Like his legs are under him. They're not landing. It's not that he doesn't see them coming. It's just that he really does not have a great chin. With that said, he recovers really well, and he's so much more dangerous than Font is. I think like he's got such a better sense for how to work his combinations together, for when to turn up the pressure. His killer instinct is off the charts. Like if and when he lands something hurtful on Font, and he will, he's going to finish Font after that. I expect this to be kind of a second or third round finish for Almeida. Like he's going to eat some shots, he's going to get in there, but eventually the pressure will pick up, the pace will pick up, and when Font tries to throw back, then Almeida is going to fucking plaster him with something.
Yeah,
would be my guess.
I basically see it the same way. And some of that has to do with Almeida's sort of anxiety about getting hit, maybe, or maybe he's like flinching and just not taking shots well, because he definitely is not as hurtable later in the fight. And it's not just because somebody like Jimmy Rivera tends to kind of slow down a bit. Like, nobody has as much success hurting Tomas Almeida after the first round. Yeah. So there's got to be something up with him that makes him especially susceptible to being hurt in the first round. But I think he'll probably get through that phase and finish Font later on. So that's enough for segment 2. When we come back, UFC St. Louis is still waiting for our breakdown. You know we have to talk about that main event between Jeremy Stephens and Doo-Ho Choi, which was an absolute war and did not go the way we predicted, although I think we both knew Jeremy Stephens was a very dangerous fight for Doo-Ho Choi. And then after that, Kamaru Usman's win over Emil Weber Meek, we're going to talk about that, as well as Darren Elkins once again getting the trademark comeback win over Michael Johnson. All of that after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let us kick things off with the main event. Jeremy Stephens, Doo-Ho Choi. These dudes threw down in St. Louis over the weekend. A nice Sunday night card. I had a great time watching it, even though I didn't really care that much about most of the fights. But it was difficult not to care about this one. Even if you knew nothing about it, a minute in, it was already set to be a lot of fun. Doo-Ho Choi came in firing low kicks like we have never seen from him before with great consistency, seemed to be giving Jeremy Stephens a lot of problems, even though Stephens was getting in counter shots, because Doo-Ho Choi still, like most Korean fighters, doesn't have great defense, doesn't have much nuance to the way he responds to things. It's really just footwork, and if he can't get out of the way, he's probably going to get hit. That happened, but then there was a turn, Pat. There was a turn in this fight in the second round. What was your assessment of what happened and how Jeremy Stephens was able to turn around a fight? I mean, did you think that Stephens was losing the fight up to the second round?
I did think Stephens was losing the fight up to the second round. And I thought that if it had continued to go that way, Stephens basically, okay, so let's break this down. Stephens got stuck on the end of Choi's reach in the first round. Choi did a really good job of setting the range with low kicks, with his jab, with a long straight right hand, and then kind of avoiding exchanges or picking his spots to exchange or exchanging from such a distance that Stephens' shots came up short. I thought Choi did a fantastic job. What Stephens did basically was turn up the pressure and shrink the distance. He kind of it's not that Choi was fighting like the world's best outside fighter in the first round. It's that Stephens was kind of uncertain about it. I don't think he expected Choi to do as good a job of it. Thought it would be easier to get inside and land the shots. I think it took him a little while to figure out what the distance was and what he needed to do. And essentially in the second, he just stopped letting himself get stuck there. He stopped letting Choi throw those shots. And when he got inside, the fight was not as good as over, but it was Stephens' fight. There was no question.
Yeah, it was about, Choi landed a front kick to the chin in the opening seconds of the second round. Everything seemed to be continuing the way it was. And then Jeremy Stephens, and if he is to be believed, which I think he is, he basically just listened to his corner's advice to just bite down and stop doing what he was doing in the first round, i.e. backing up. He just, there was a moment where about 20 seconds, 30 seconds into round 2, where Choi went for a shot and Stephens countered and missed, shifted forward, came through with more punches, and then ended with a nice knee that landed clean. And after that, it was like a game of chicken, and Choi couldn't win it. He did not have the experience or the know-how to compete in that kind of fight with Jeremy Stephens, nor did he have the desire, because at a certain point, Jeremy Stephens just stopped taking backward steps. When Choi would throw at him, he would either defend it and come back with a counter, or he would get hit and come back with a counter. But no matter what, he did not back up. He came forward as he was throwing, or he planted his feet and traded. And Choi lost that game of chicken. He just could not stand his ground and do his best to make Stevens back up. So he went on the back foot, as it was in the Cub Swanson fight. Doo-Ha Choi just can't do his best on the back foot. He is like half the fighter he is coming forward when he is retreating. Even his lovely jab that you called out, Pat, it disappears when he's going backwards, which is a time that most fighters find the jab to be extremely useful, is when you're trying to retreat. But everything just kind of disappears when Choi is put onto the back foot.
Mm-hmm. No, well, I mean, not everything. He can still counter you, and he's still dangerous, but he's nowhere near as dangerous as he is moving forward.
Yeah.
And I think that was, I think essentially we thought Choi would do a better job of moving forward himself. I did not think he would consent to kind of fight an open space game against Stevens. I understand why he did it, right? Especially after that war he had with Cub Swanson. He's thinking, I'm going to fight more technically. I'm going to use my full toolbox. But there's always one of the things that fighters at that stage, after they suffer their first really devastating loss like that, where they have to kind of figure out what the next step is. And a lot of times it's an overcorrection. They focus on the skills aspect of it instead of the mindset aspect, where they try to figure out, like, okay, I have these things that I know how to do. How do I not do the things that caused me to lose that fight? And so instead of thinking, how do I maximize the kind of fighter that I am while putting myself less in danger, they try to do something else entirely that still plays off your skills.
And it really does come down to mindset, because I'm sure Doo-Ha Choi knows how to throw a backstepping jab, but he just doesn't do it. When it's clear he's, at least at this moment in time, he's not mentally cut out for any style of fighting that does not involve coming forward and even pot shotting coming forward. Like, I really think that's what Choi does best. I don't think he's like a constant aggressive pressure fighter. He likes to kind of sit on the end of range, make you fear the quickness of his hands, and then he'll sit you down with something really well timed. He can kind of play with your reactions.
He's somewhere between he's like a particularly aggressive boxer puncher.
Sure.
I would say. Like, I think I think we kind of err if we think of him as an aggressive counterpuncher or a pressure fighter. He's actually a guy who likes to exchange, who's pretty good at exchanging, but wants to dictate the terms of it, and isn't particularly concerned with forcing you to the fence. Like, where a lot of aggressive counterpunchers, that's really what they want to do. Mm-hmm. They want to put you in a position where you are cornered, you have no choice but to throw, like Cyborg. Cyborg is a classic example of that, right? Where you have no choice but to do it. Choi isn't as concerned about that. Or like Shane Burgos really wants you to be with your back to the fence, where you have to throw, where you have to move. Choi is a little more organic about his options as a counterpuncher, but he likes to be dictating things. He's not content to just kind of sit back and do whatever and then throw back at you when you throw.
Yeah, but really, like, the contrast between when he was dictating this fight and when he wasn't, it was even more stark than in the Cub Swanson fight, probably because Jeremy Stevens hits harder than Cub Swanson. But the
lesson here that Choi should take is that, like, okay, it's not enough to use the jab, to use the kicks, etc. It's that I need to be in control of when and where we're doing these things. And I think he'll probably figure that out. He's a pretty sharp fighter. He learns new things. Obviously, he's got a pretty deep toolkit. He's not dumb. I think he can figure that out. But he kind of got out-thought by a crafty veteran. Somebody said this. I can't remember who said it to me. My apologies if I can't remember. That Stevens is kind of having a miniature Robbie Lawler moment.
Yeah, he's doing
was it somebody? He tagged both of us. It was longtime listener Garrick16 on Twitter.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't remember who it was either. The moment I see somebody's name and then I look away from the screen, I forget who it is, and it's not a judgment on who said it to me. It's just my goldfish brain. That's all. Yeah,
long time listener. Nice to hear from you. But yeah, I think that's kind of true. There are some real similarities there.
Yeah. Jeremy Stevens looks now like a guy who he's in there against opponents who still have like some questions about their games and are still figuring things out. And it's like Jeremy Stevens has now fully realized, this is what I'm good at. And I'm just going to work my fucking ass off doing what I'm good at. And that's going to be good enough to knock out a lot of these young kids. He's still an exceptionally dangerous fighter, and honestly, I think like Robbie Lawler, like Rafael dos Anjos, like he's getting more dangerous in a lot of ways with time because he has this razor sharp focus on just turning every fight he's in into the kind of fight he needs. Yes, he can still overlook somebody like Renato Moicano. I think maybe in the first moments of this fight, he had such a bad first round because he probably didn't respect what Doo Ho Choi had to offer all that much either. But when his corner tells him, listen, you have to bite down and make this guy fight your fight, he does it better than he ever has before. So, and he's dangerous as hell.
Yeah, the kinds of similarities between all those dudes are worth bearing in mind. They're worth thinking about because they were all guys who started young. Like all of these dudes that we see having these late career resurgences are all guys who started fighting really young. Stevens was 18 when he made his pro debut. He had his first fight in the UFC when he was 20. Like Robbie Lawler, I think had his first pro fight at 19. He was in the UFC at 20. Rafael dos Anjos, I think, had his first pro fight at 20 and debuted in the UFC at 23 or 24. But like all these dudes have a tremendous amount of experience. They're all really athletic to start with. They're all durable, all really durable guys. And not just in terms of taking a good punch, but durable in terms of they haven't had these huge long periods where they've been out due to injury. So that means they've been in the gym. They're all hard workers. They're all surrounded by good people and have been surrounded by good people for their entire careers. There's a lesson to draw there, which is that if you can put yourself in a situation where you're in the gym all the time with people who are good, you have a lot of experience, and you're open to learning new things, you can have this kind of late career resurgence or this kind of late career run where you have figured out who you are as a fighter and how to force your opponents into the kind of fight that you want to be in.
Yeah, and Stevens maybe doesn't have the extreme professional mindset that we lauded RDA for when we last talked about him. But he
kind of does now. He didn't earlier in his career, but he's kind of like pulled himself together.
Yeah, I think he'll always be a guy who occasionally will just like overlook somebody or not take them seriously and not fight to his full potential. But he definitely lives the life of a true professional. Like he does things that old experienced fighters know they have to do. At this point, I think Jeremy Stevens shows up. He does his fucking road work. You know, he just takes care of like conditioning and peaking in his camp, and everything is just in its place because he's been doing it for so long. Doesn't really have to think about it anymore. So other than shooting himself in the foot in cases like the Renato Moicano fight, he's a lot like RDA in that he does well because he just kind of shows up and is perfectly prepared to fight exactly the kind of fight he's been fighting for the last 300 years. So credit to Jeremy Stevens. Step down probably needed for Doo Ho Choi after this, and sad to say, but he's going to be off the radar for a while because his military service in South Korea is coming up relatively soon, and now he's nowhere near a title shot. So I think a step down, honestly. Other people were saying, how about Shayman Moraes? And I'm like, how about somebody easy? Like, he just got killed by two huge punchers in these brutal, violent back-and-forth wars. Shayman Moraes is just a worse version of that kind of fighter. I want to see them just give Doo Ho Choi another guy to just kill in the first round and let that be what he carries with him in his mind as he goes off to his military service and hopefully continues honing his game in the meantime. That's what I want. I want to take care of this prospect because he's very young and he has a very bright future, but you know, don't do to him what you are trying currently to do to Mike Perry, you know, who's just fighting bruiser after bruiser with no rest whatsoever. But anyway, Kamaru Usman also fought on this card. Probably didn't do himself any favors by saying after his win that he only used 30%, because especially when you don't finish somebody, that's never really what you want to say. It's also the kind of thing that fans will throw back in your face the moment you lose. They'd be like, oh, was that 40% Kamaru Usman? You know, why didn't you go to 100% and get the win? But all of that shit aside, we've been saying for a while, Pat, that Usman is a fighter who does not get the respect he deserves and who is legitimately one of the best welterweights in the world. He looked that way to me, but his game is still kind of weird. What did you think of his performance?
Wait, I'm sorry. I got totally lost in something for a second. Can we go back?
Yeah, you're fine. Usman's game is still a little jumbly. Like there's still these weird moments where he's just kind of winging things on the feet and looks a little awkward and stiff. But But the moment he gets a chance to wrestle somebody, he is mind-blowingly good at it. He is. I mean, he might be the best wrestler in this division.
I think he probably is the best wrestler in this division at this point. It's either him. I think
Tyron Woodley's up at the top.
Yeah. But Woodley so rarely uses it.
Right.
You know, like Woodley is a low volume kind of wrestler.
Usman fights like the best wrestler in the division.
Yeah, I think, and even more than Usman's straight up wrestling, it's his feel for how to hurt you when he gets you down.
Yeah.
Like he is always making you feel his weight. He's making you feel his punches and his elbows and his knees. Like he is not just trying to wrestle you. He is trying to hurt you all the time. And he's trying to hurt you when he takes you down too. He will slam you hard in awkward positions. He doesn't seem to get tired. Like he's very much a representative of the new kind of like decision tree type of takedown artist, where it's not so much the distinction between up and down, it's the various stages between those points where he makes his hay. He doesn't need to get you all the way down to have dragged you into his kind of fight. And that's kind of the story of what he did to Meek. Is it was just a constant like series of getting drowned between standing and Meek having his back flat on the mat. Like, and that's what Usman does well. It's really, really hard to deal with that. I'm a little worried that he seems to have been stuck at exactly this stage of development as a striker for about a year and a half now. He looks like exactly strides. The same.
Yeah, because it's. I mean, it's also hard to say. Like maybe he'll turn a corner if we just see him against a really relevant opponent. But with each passing fight, it's hard to look at them and say like, oh well, against Sergio Moraes, he thought he could fight that way, so he was just kind of a little reckless. And you know, against Emil Meek, he thought that way. Like maybe that's the case, and maybe that's why he was saying it was 30%. Who knows? Maybe he really is like just not focusing on doing what he can as a striker, but that I find that to be a little worrying. Like I would expect a fighter like Kamaru Usman, if he had more in the tank, if he had more to show, or if he was capable of doing something different in the gym so that he looked different in the ring, that he would do those things.
He just doesn't look. It looks like he's trying to talk himself into doing it.
Yeah,
that's the only way I can think of. Where like Colby Covington caught a lot of shit for some of the strikes he threw against Damian Maia, but like Covington never looked like he was having to talk himself into throwing them.
Oh, hell no.
They may not have looked great. They may have looked ugly. They may not have been especially effective, but he was just throwing.
Yeah, well, that's why we can look at Colby Covington's striking, which is technically worse by degrees than Kamaru Usman's striking, and yet Covington does look like the far more natural striker. He looks comfortable doing it. He doesn't hesitate to throw. He doesn't. You're right. You're absolutely spot on. Like Colby Covington doesn't look like he's thinking about anything. He just does what he attacks whatever's open at that moment. And Usman only looks that way when he's wrestling.
Yeah, but Usman looks even more like that than anybody I've ever seen, maybe, except for like a few dudes like Khabib. He looks like Khabib in the sense that he's just like, he's always multiple steps ahead of you. He's not worried if you he's not especially worried if you disengage from him. He's like, because you know what, we're going to end up right back here again, and you're going to be the one who's screwed. Yeah. He doesn't like Covington is kind of like that too, but like there's a general thoughtlessness to Colby Covington that extends everything from his apparently racial views to the way that he works a front headlock. So,
but it's good that we're talking about Colby Covington because that's who Kamaru Usman called out, and
I think they should fight.
Absolutely,
they should absolutely fight.
Absolutely, let the unpopular Kamaru Usman engage in a wrestling contest with Colby Covington. I think that's a matchup that I would expect Usman if they were to engage in wrestling over and over. I would expect Usman to win because he really is like comparable to few fighters other than like Khabib Nurmagomedov and Mirsad Bektic when it comes to how well he chains his wrestling together, and not even just breaking people down when they're fighting against the cage, which like all of these guys he does exceptionally well, but chaining his takedown attempts together too. Like Emil Meek showed some really surprisingly strong takedown defense. He was hitting angles. He was never just resting and giving up a position. He was always reacting. And so Usman got in, he finished very few of his initial takedown attempts, but he kept just slamming Meek on the ground. And it got worse as the fight went on because every time Meek would react, even if he was reacting correctly, Usman knew before Meek even reacted what the next move would be to counter that reaction. He has a system in place for wrestling. And so you just can't outthink a system because there's no thought involved.
Yeah, this is something we talked about a little bit beforehand. And one of the reasons why this matchup was maybe more interesting than it looked on paper is because Meek thrives in a grimy fight. Meek thrives in those in-between spaces. He is hard to hold down. He's hard to get down, and he can hurt you in those kinds of in-between spaces if you get lazy with your head positioning. That's how he finished Husamar Palhares when they fought back on the regional scene in the fight that put Meek on the map. Like, Meek thrives in that kind of grimy ass fight because he has great instincts and he's got really good kind of underlying skills. Like, he is great at cracking down on a whizzer to get himself out. And he's really good. Yeah.
And it took a lot of the same shit happening over and over to break his will as well, because there were he would be held down for most of a round, and then the second round, and then there would be a glimmer of an opportunity. Usman, they would disengage, and maybe Usman would have his back to the fence, and Meek's eyes would just go wide, and he would go after Usman. And Usman did not respond all that well to that kind of crazy striking pressure. Like, Meek got close to hurting him and putting him in serious trouble, although I will say, as unnatural as he looks as a striker, I did like that Usman never took a panic shot. He never, when Meek was coming after him, it was never like he shot without thinking about it. And that is to his credit. He didn't just immediately lunge in the kind of way that you would get hit with a knee or an uppercut because you're not focusing on what you're doing. He would cover up, he would try to get away, wait for Meek to charge again, and then take him off his feet with the reactive takedown. So, I mean, there's these little flashes of real brilliance, even in Usman's transitions from striking to wrestling and grappling, but there is still something to be desired from him as a striker. It's hard for me to really put my finger on what the problem is. But the wrestling is awesome. It really is awesome.
Well, and I mean, like, there is an extent to which we are absolutely nitpicking this, because there's no question that Usman is a top 5 fighter. Yeah. The question is whether he's a champion, I think. Like, there's this dude, he's he is, I think, 29 years old or 30 years old. He has... he's only been fighting for 4.5 years, going on 5 years. God damn. We're talking about a guy who is going to be hanging out in the top, at the very worst, the top 10, and almost certainly in the top 5 for the next 4 to 5 years. Like, I mean, this is the bar that we're talking about here.
Somebody like Sergio Moraes, like, yeah, his striking's not pretty, but this is like an Andre Dida striker who knows what he's doing. Even with the ugliness of his moves, like, he knows how they work and when to execute them. And, like, that's... When you remind yourself that Kamaru Usman is a novice of MMA, that kind of does change the tone of that, I guess. Like, he's going in there against people who have just been throwing and avoiding punches for a much longer time than him. And maybe, absolutely true. Maybe he'll just turn that corner at some point. We won't see it coming, but he's going to look like the fighter he's destined to be. I think he has the athletic potential and the mindset for it, but we will see. Let's spare a few words here before we wrap up for Darren Elkins' remarkable victory over Michael Johnson. I said it, Pat. I said it not only on last week's show, but the moment I saw Michael Johnson slowing down, I screamed using my keyboard. All caps, I said, Michael Johnson's getting tired. He's dead.
Yep. And you were right. You were absolutely right. You were absolutely right.
You can't fucking get tired against Darren Elkins. It's just, Jesus. You can't win if that happens.
My God. It was like, as soon, you could see the momentum turn. You could see it shift. And it was like, oh, okay, the fight's over. Like, it's even just a matter of time. Yeah.
Elkins started to get shots in. Like, Elkins was getting lit up. You were right, by the way. Like, the weird awkwardness of his striking, it did give Michael Johnson some problems. Elkins was landing a lot of very ugly but quite effective kicks to the body and legs. He was doing these weird, like, windmilling combinations. He was getting tagged by everything early on.
The man is nobody's fool. No. Darren Elkins is nobody's fool.
Hell no.
I remember, like, somebody after the fight was like, "Oh my God, he's taken so much damage. Like, listen to the way he's slurring." So I went back and I listened to a couple of Darren Elkins interviews from like 2012 or 2013, and I was like, "Oh no, that's just how he sounds." So, I mean, is it good for Darren Elkins to keep getting hit in the face like this? God, probably not. But I'm not worried imminently about at least that particular problem.
Yeah.
Jesus. But who do you want to see Darren Elkins fight next? This is my real question to you. Who do you want to see him fight?
Well, people were this. I'm going to just share the call that somebody else on Twitter made. Again, I forget everyone's name the moment after I hear it or read it. So I apologize that I don't know quite who said this, but they were saying they want to see Elkins versus Ortega and Jeremy Stephens versus Josh Emmett, and that'll set the division up for title contenders for the relatively near future. I like that idea. I would also be 100% down to see Jeremy Stephens versus Darren Elkins. If Brian if I know that, but they're both in completely different places now. Jeremy Stephens needs another win if he wants to put himself in the title conversation, and Darren Elkins does too. And now Jeremy Stephens has some serious momentum, but only 2 wins behind him.
Oh shit! I cannot believe that you made me feel so old. Like, that fight was in 2014. Elkins Stephens. That was 2014, man. That was the card with the weird Benson Henderson Josh Thompson fight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, Jesus Christ, how has this been so long?
It was ages ago now.
I'm suddenly feeling my age very much.
Elkins has got 6 wins in a row since then, man. It's a different world now.
Yeah. I think in terms of the kind of challenge, I would really rather see Elkins Ortega.
Yeah.
Because if Ortega is probably going to beat Elkins up. He's definitely going to find space for his submission attempts. There's no question about that. But Elkins is really difficult to submit. He's absolutely relentless. He's not going to. He's going to get better as the fight goes on. That's really what I want to see Ortega find ways to deal with. I think Ortega probably finds a submission. I think he probably finds a way to get that done. But that's absolutely what I want to see.
Who has out-grappled Darren Elkins?
Charles Oliveira way back in the day. Didn't he submit him with something? Yeah, he submitted him with an arm bar.
Yeah, Hakron Diaz beat him, although I don't really remember how that fight played out.
Lot of clinch takedowns, if memory serves.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, but the thing is that Ortega is going to give up top position, and I'm not sure who can beat Darren Elkins when he gets to his kind of grappling fight.
That's what I want to find out.
Right? Yeah, because
I want to know.
It's like I still remember thinking, like, looking at Chaz Skelly and thinking, I mean, this was when Darren Elkins was 1-1 in his last 2 fights, and so didn't have this massive amount of momentum and this sure sense that he is just a comeback machine that you have to kill to stop. But I thought, like, oh, Chaz Skelly is like a younger version of Darren Elkins, kind of. He's going to go for these crazy submissions. He's going to... Nope. You just cannot fight Darren Elkins' fight. As Zane Simon said wisely before, when I made that ill-advised pick, you don't try to beat an OG at his own game. And Darren Elkins is an OG of that top position, grimy, grinding wrestling game. So if Ortega consents to that kind of fight, yeah, I think that's a really fascinating matchup.
Yeah, that's really what I want to see. And Steven Emmett would be fucking baller too. I would love that fight.
Yeah, and also like a chance for Josh Emmett to actually solidify himself as a ranked featherweight, since he missed weight in his last fight and also, got a knockout that nobody saw coming, and that's about all he's done in this division. So, yeah, I'm down with those 2 options, but Elkins Ortega sounds like a lot of fun to me.
Yep.
I'm on board. All right, well, I think that does it for our show. I enjoyed those fights. I am very much looking forward to the main event next weekend. I'm not sure how much of the undercard I'm going to watch live, because truly, Pat, the best way to enjoy a fight card is not to care about the things you don't really want to care about, and then just watch them and break them down later.
Seriously, I find myself enjoying MMA more when I'm not watching fights that I don't actively anticipate wanting to watch.
Yeah.
Like, occasionally I get surprised, but like, if there's nothing on the Fight Pass undercard that is really calling out to you, don't watch it. Just don't watch it. Don't watch it.
Unless you
don't
got
force
nothing
yourself
else
to watch it.
You got nothing else to do.
Go for a walk. Like,
go outside. God damn it.
Yeah, I do literally anything else other than watch a thing that you don't feel that you don't want to watch for the sake of being a completionist.
Yeah. Well, this weekend, my experience is going to be all about trying to heighten the relative importance of the main event. I'm not gonna watch anything I don't care about watching. I'm gonna walk away to order pizza or whatever, and I'm going to maintain this hype I feel for the main event, because I am genuinely very excited for it. And I think
the opener, Islam Makhachev versus Gleison Tibau. Okay. Gleison Tibau is back, baby.
You got to watch that one. right?
I actually really want to watch that.
Yeah, I like that one too. I'm on board for that. But you got to watch that one. Listeners, don't skip the first fight. But basically everything else except the main event is all right. Well, except for the other ones we talked about. Anyway, I'm dragging it out like I always do with a pointless diatribe. Let's go ahead and wrap up the show. Just before we close, anything you have coming out this week, Pat?
I do not have anything coming out this week. Last week, I had a new episode of Tides of History looking at the Renaissance. That is one of my favorite episodes that I've done. I hope you check it out. Other than that, I may have a piece, or I will have a piece on Deadspin about about Francis Ngannou and Stipe Miocic coming out. And I will probably have a post-fight piece also, but that's it. That's it for the time being.
Yeah, I'm still working on my fucking matchmaking piece, but it is a work in process, and I think it is coming together. So still keep your eyes peeled for that one. And I definitely am going to be doing something on UFC 220. Like I'm feeling back in the swing, and I cannot avoid writing about this because I'm very hyped for the first time in a long time for a heavyweight title fight in the UFC, and that is something special.
Good.
It's going to be good. All right. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Make sure you check us out on Patreon. If you are not already subscribed, we release bi-monthly bonus episodes on there. And this year, I'm going to make a very sincere effort to do more than 2 episodes on most months. We already have 2 episodes that have come out on the Patreon in the first month of 2018. Pat and I did our 2017 year-end awards, aka the Handies, so make sure you check that out. And then Phil McKenzie, as I mentioned earlier, joined me for another episode of our sub show, The Underdogs, where we talk about journeymen and unheralded fighters. And John McDessie was our subject for that episode, and I think it was a really fun discussion that sort of got into the development of the MMA metagame as well. Keep your eyes peeled for more of that stuff. $3 a month is all it takes to get access to all of that bonus content. I think that is quite a bargain. And while you are considering whether or not to invest in it, I will close out the show. Find us on social media if you have any questions, concerns, or comments. Pat and I are both on Twitter. You can find Pat at Patrick_Wyman and myself at Boxing Bush. Find us both on Facebook as well, facebook.com/either Patrick Wyman MMA or Connor Ruebusch MMA. And if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you know you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.